Have you ever been dismissed before you even had a chance to prove yourself? When 45-year-old cleaning lady Elena Martinez stepped onto that Broadway stage, no one expected anything but failure. The directors didn't even try to hide their smirks. But what happened next didn't just silence their laughter, it changed lives. Elena Martinez gently smoothed the wrinkles from her faded dress as she sat in the waiting area. Around her, aspiring performers in designer outfits checked their professionally styled hair in compact mirrors and scrolled through their phones. At 45, Elena was easily 20 years older than most of the other auditionees for the prestigious Broadway revival of Phantom of the Opera. She clutched a worn leather bag containing sheet music that had yellowed with age. Unlike the others, she wore no makeup, and her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun. A cleaning lady by profession, Elena had saved for months just to afford the bus ticket to New York from her small town in Pennsylvania. "Number 127, called the production assistant, barely looking up from his clipboard. Elena stood, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. "That's me," she said with a slight accent that betrayed her Mexican heritage. Several of the younger performers exchanged glances, barely concealing their smirks. One whispered audibly to another, "Is she serious? Did she miss the memo that this isn't an audition for janitorial staff?" Eleanor pretended not to hear as she followed the assistant through the heavy theater doors. The grand theater felt cavernous, with only 5 people seated in the front row: the director, producer, musical director, choreographer, and casting director. Their expressions ranged from boredom to mild irritation as they glanced up to see Elena. "Name?" asked the director, Marcus Reed, not bothering to hide his impatience. "Elena Martinez," she replied, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. The producer leaned over to whisper something to Marcus, who nodded with a barely suppressed smile. "And you're auditioning for?" Marcus asked, scanning his papers with a frown. "Christine Day," Elena answered. A poorly concealed snort came from the choreographer. The casting director didn't even try to hide her amusement, allowing a small laugh to escape before composing herself. Marcus cleared his throat. "Ms. Martinez, you do understand that Christine is typically played by someone—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic phrase. "Significantly younger." "I understand the tradition," Elena replied with dignity. "But the character's essence is her voice and her heart. Those have no age." The musical director, James Wilson, rolled his eyes so dramatically that Elena could see it from the stage. "Well, let's not waste more time than necessary. What will you be singing for us today?" "Think of Me," Elena replied, handing her sheet music to the pianist. James raised an eyebrow. "Of course you are," he muttered, passing the music along with a condescending smile. The pianist, a kind-faced young man, gave Elena an encouraging nod as he arranged the music. It was the only friendly gesture she'd received since entering the theater. "Whenever you're ready," Marcus said, uncapping his pen to make notes, though his expression suggested he didn't expect to write anything positive. The pianist began the introduction, and Elena closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. When she opened them, she noticed several stagehands and other auditionees had quietly slipped into the back of the theater, apparently to witness what they anticipated would be a spectacular failure. Eleanor had known this moment would come. The judgment, the dismissal before she'd even opened her mouth. It was why she had hesitated for so long before answering the open call advertisement. But last night, sitting in her modest hotel room, she had made peace with whatever would happen. 25 years ago, Eleanor had been a rising star at the National Conservatory of Music in Mexico City, with a voice that professors called once in a generation. But life had taken unexpected turns. A sick mother to care for, a marriage that ended when her husband couldn't handle her ambitions, and eventually immigration to the United States to start fresh, leaving her musical dreams behind. For years, she had sung only for herself, while cleaning houses, while riding the bus, while watching performances online that she could never afford to see in person. She had studied every nuance of Christine's character and music in private, never daring to share her passion, until her employer, Mrs. Abernathy, had overheard her singing while cleaning and had been moved to tears. The elderly woman had insisted on buying Elena the bus ticket to New York, saying, "Some voices aren't meant to be hidden." So as the intro to Think of Me continued to play, Elena made the decision she had rehearsed in her mind. She would not just sing the notes, she would bare her soul. If this was to be her only chance on a Broadway stage, she would make it count. Not for the people who mocked her, but for the young woman she had once been, whose dreams had been deferred but never truly abandoned. The first notes left Elena's lips with such crystalline purity that the director's pen froze mid-air. Her voice, trained in the bel canto tradition, filled the theater without apparent effort, each note perfectly placed and resonant. As she moved into the verse, Elena's technical precision was enhanced by something rarer, emotional authenticity that made every word feel newly written. Her simple dress and lack of makeup faded from notice as her presence expanded to fill the cavernous space. James Wilson, the musical director who had been so dismissive moments before, slowly closed his notebook and leaned forward, his expression transforming from contempt to disbelief. The choreographer's mouth literally hung open. When Elena reached the coloratura passage, the moment that separated proficient singers from exceptional ones, the stagehands in the back stopped pretending to work. A young woman who had been waiting to audition next pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. By the final verse, Elena had transcended the audition entirely. She wasn't performing for approval anymore. She was channeling every moment of longing, every dream deferred, every private triumph and quiet disappointment of her life. Her voice soared into the theater's highest reaches, filling spaces that had heard the greatest voices in Broadway history, yet somehow making them new. As the final note hung in the air, sustained with perfect control before gently releasing, the theater fell into a silence so complete it seemed even the building itself was holding its breath. Then, from the back of the theater, a single person began to applaud. The sound broke the spell, and suddenly everyone from the stagehands to the director erupted in applause. Some were standing. The pianist was wiping tears from his eyes. Marcus Reed had risen to his feet, his professional demeanor cracked wide open. "Where?" he asked when the applause finally subsided. "Have you been all this time?" Before Elena could answer, the theater doors at the back opened, and an elegant older man walked down the center aisle. The production team immediately straightened in their seats. "Lawrence," Marcus called out, a note of surprise in his voice. "I didn't know you were dropping by today." Lawrence Winters, the legendary Broadway producer financing the revival, nodded briefly to Marcus before turning his attention to Elena. "I was in a meeting upstairs and heard your voice through the ventilation system," he said. "I've heard hundreds of Christines over the decades, but never one who made me stop a business meeting to find the source." Elena stood silent, overwhelmed by the moment. "What's your performance background, Ms. Martinez?" Lawrence asked. "I clean houses, sir," Elena replied with simple dignity. "But I studied voice at the National Conservatory in Mexico City many years ago." A murmur ran through the theater. Lawrence turned to Marcus. "Have you made any final casting decisions for Christine?" Marcus shook his head, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "We're still in early auditions." "Good," Lawrence said, then addressed Elena directly. "I'd like to hear you read some dialogue, and perhaps another piece. Would you be willing to stay a while longer?" James Wilson, who had mocked Elena earlier, interjected with newfound enthusiasm. "I'd love to work through some of the more challenging pieces with Ms. Martinez. Her breath control and phrasing are extraordinary." Elena noticed how quickly the tone had changed, how the same people who couldn't hide their disdain minutes earlier were now falling over themselves to engage with her. The casting director was hurriedly flipping through her notes as if searching for information on Elena that didn't exist. Elena caught the eye of the kind pianist, who gave her a genuine smile of admiration, untainted by the sudden shift in the room's politics. In that moment, she made another decision to accept this unexpected turn with grace, but never to forget how it felt to be dismissed. "I would be honored to stay," she said, her voice steady and warm. "I've waited a long time for this opportunity." 3 hours later, Eleanor had read through scenes, sung duets with the tenor being considered for the Phantom, and worked through the most challenging musical pieces in the show. Throughout it all, Lawrence Winters remained in the theater, occasionally offering quiet comments to Marcus. As Elena worked through a difficult passage with James, who was now treating her with exaggerated respect, she noticed Marcus and Lawrence in intense conversation. Lawrence's expression was firm, while Marcus appeared to be offering objections, gesturing occasionally toward Elena. Finally, Marcus approached the stage. "Ms. Martinez, would you mind stepping into the wings for a moment? The team needs to discuss something." Eleanor nodded and walked off stage, where she found herself standing next to Sophia, the young woman who had been scheduled to audition after her, but never got the chance. "You're amazing," Sophia whispered. "I've never heard anyone sing like that." "Thank you," Elena replied. "I'm sorry your audition was delayed." Sophia shook her head. "Are you kidding? This is a masterclass. I'm learning more watching you than I would in a year of lessons." Their conversation was interrupted when Marcus called Elena back on stage. The entire production team was now standing. "Ms. Martinez," Marcus began, his tone formal but with a new undercurrent of respect. "We would like to invite you to callbacks next week for the role of Christine Daae." Elena's heart soared, but before she could respond, Lawrence stepped forward. "Marcus, stop equivocating," he said firmly. "Tell her the truth." Marcus hesitated, then continued. "The truth is, Ms. Martinez, your audition today was exceptional. Truly one of the finest I've witnessed in my career." He glanced at Lawrence, who nodded for him to continue. "However," Marcus said, "I have concerns about casting someone of your—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Age," Elena supplied simply. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "Christine is traditionally played by someone younger, and audiences have certain expectations." Elena nodded, unsurprised. "I understand." "I don't," Lawrence interjected. "The role requires a soprano who can handle the vocal demands while bringing emotional depth to the character. Ms. Martinez demonstrated both in abundance. Any concerns about physical appearance are secondary to talent of this caliber." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Lawrence, I respect your opinion enormously, but there are marketing considerations, traditions evolve," Lawrence cut in. "And as for marketing, imagine the story. A cleaning lady with an extraordinary voice discovered and brought to Broadway after decades of obscurity. That's a narrative that will sell more tickets than casting another predictable choice." James Wilson, sensing which way the wind was blowing, quickly added, "I agree with Lawrence. Ms. Martinez's vocal technique is flawless. Training someone younger to sing with that level of control and emotional maturity would take years." The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus struggled with the decision. Finally, he turned to Elena. "Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to accept the role of Christine Daae for a limited 3-month engagement, with the understanding that we may need to make some adjustments to the production to accommodate the new interpretation?" Eleanor felt her heart pounding. "Mr. Reed, I've cleaned other people's houses for 20 years while singing these songs only for myself. I would be honored to bring Christine to life in whatever way you think best serves the story." Marcus nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "Then welcome to Broadway, Ms. Martinez. We'll have contracts sent to you tomorrow. Do you have representation?" Elena shook her head. "No, sir." Lawrence handed her a business card. "Call my office tomorrow. My team will ensure you're properly represented in contract negotiations." As the meeting concluded and Elena gathered her belongings, she noticed the production assistant who had called her number earlier now hovering nervously. "Ms. Martinez, can I help you with anything? Get you water or coffee?" Elena smiled gently. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As she walked through the theater toward the exit, she passed the group of young performers who had mocked her earlier. They fell silent as she approached, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and awe. Instead of ignoring them, Elena stopped. "You all have beautiful voices," she said sincerely. "I heard some of you singing while I was waiting. Remember that technical skill is important, but what moves an audience is authenticity. Your voice is most powerful when it tells your own truth." With that, she continued toward the door, her steps lighter than they had been in decades. 6 months later, the revival of Phantom of the Opera had become the talk of Broadway. Critics who had initially been skeptical of casting an older Christine had been won over by Elena's transcendent performance. The New York Times review had called it a revolutionary interpretation that discovers new emotional depths in a familiar work, while Variety declared that Martinez brings decades of lived experience to Christine, transforming the character from a naive ingenue to a woman whose soul has been awakened by music. In the green room after a sold-out Saturday evening performance, Elena was removing her stage makeup when there was a knock at her door. "Come in," she called. Marcus Reed entered, carrying a bouquet of roses. "Another standing ovation," he said, placing the flowers on her dressing table. "That makes 47 consecutive performances." Elena smiled. "The audience was wonderful tonight." Marcus hesitated, then sat down in the chair beside her. "Elena, I owe you an apology. One I should have given months ago." She turned to face him, waiting. "When you first walked into that audition, I made every possible wrong assumption about you. I was arrogant, dismissive, and completely blind to the extraordinary talent standing right in front of me." He shook his head, genuine regret in his expression. "If Lawrence hadn't been there that day—" "But he was," Elena said gently. "And you were willing to change your mind. That's what matters." Marcus nodded. "Still, it was a hard lesson in how easily we discard people based on appearance or background. I'd like to think I've learned from it." "Have you?" Elena asked, her tone curious rather than accusatory. "We've started a new initiative," Marcus said. "Open auditions specifically for talented performers who don't fit traditional Broadway casting expectations. Age, body type, background, none of it matters if the talent is there. Lawrence is funding it, but it was actually James's idea." He smiled wryly. "Another person who learned a valuable lesson from your audition." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest. "That's wonderful news." "There's more," Marcus continued. "We're extending the run for another 6 months, and Lawrence wants to discuss the possibility of a tour afterward. But before all that," he handed her an envelope. "Mrs. Abernathy, the woman who bought your bus ticket, is in the audience tonight. Front row center. She doesn't know you've arranged for her to come backstage after the show." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. After Marcus left, Elena sat quietly, contemplating how profoundly her life had changed in half a year. From cleaning houses and singing in solitude to standing ovations on Broadway. Yet the greatest victory wasn't the acclaim or even the role itself. It was the knowledge that somewhere in the audience tonight there might be another person with a deferred dream, watching her and thinking, perhaps it's not too late for me either. Elena Martinez, who had once been laughed at during an audition, had not only silenced the theater with her voice, she had changed the narrative about who deserves to be heard. And that, she reflected as she prepared to meet Mrs. Abernathy, was the most satisfying note of all. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in being underestimated. When others judge us by our appearance, age, or background, they reveal their own limitations, not ours. Elena's story reminds us that true talent and passion cannot be contained by others' narrow expectations. Your voice, whether literal or metaphorical, deserves to be heard, regardless of what others might initially think. Been underestimated only to prove someone wrong. Or perhaps you've been guilty of judging someone too quickly. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring narratives that challenge our perceptions. and remind us of the extraordinary potential within ordinary people. Remember, it's never too late to silence the theater with your unique voice.